Patrick Bet-David just called Graham Stephan gay. That shit was so funny. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but here's the clip.
Are you gay?
Me? No.
If you're watching this without any context, I'm just going to give you a little bit of context, and then I want to share a lot of my thoughts on it too. But basically what happened is Patrick Bet-David was having a conversation, interview with Graham Stephan, and PBD Patrick was talking about like, hey, what are your thoughts on all the LGBTQ stuff that's taught in schools? And Graham just kind of wouldn't give him an answer. He was just like, well, you know, I think it's okay. And Patrick is like, okay, do you think they should teach about LGBTQ or do you think they should teach about God? So those are two fucking completely different extremes, right? Let's just take a look at Graham's response here.
Would you rather have your kids have to learn about God, or would you take God out of school? They have to learn about what it is to be gay, lesbian, bisexual. Which of those two would you want your kids to learn about?
I feel like there has to be a balance because you don't want to be oppressive. There's got to be some sort of
You got to
structure.
pick one of them. You got to pick one of them. Come on, Graham.
I don't know, man. I don't.
Right? Graham is just like, dude, I don't know. Like, and then Patrick just out of nowhere goes like, are you gay? And Graham is like, no. It's funny because Graham is nodding yes. He's like, no. It was just a really funny situation and funny conversation, but the context of it, I think, is incredibly important to understand. And I understand Patrick Bet-David's point. So Patrick Bet-David is basically saying like, look, our kids are going to be taught something. Do we want them to learn about God or do we want them to learn about LGBTQ? And for me, I'm not very religious. I was born very religious. I'm not very religious. So I would want neither to be taught. My personal preference is teach them fucking science and how to make money and how to cut on taxes and how to be a good human being. And that's fucking it. That's the job of the school. If you want to teach somebody about God, let them learn about God at home. If the kid needs to figure out how to be gay or something else, they can figure it out on their own. But just teach them the core things that make people operate on a day-to-day basis. But if Patrick Bet-David asked me that question, it was between God and LGBTQ and I could only choose one, I'd probably go God. Here's the explanation and reasoning for this. And Patrick Bet-David actually gives a great example of this. He goes, what's happening is we're getting generations that are gayer and gayer than the past. So before it was like a couple of percentage, which makes sense because I think at that point it was like super negatively viewed being gay. Okay. I personally have no problems with anybody that's gay. I have a bunch of friends who were gay, but that's what happened, right? So before you had these generations, only a couple of percentage. Then now it's about 20% of the population that identifies as either gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or queer, or one of those. Patrick's point is that we're being influenced and now we're getting more people to convert to being gay than the people who are just going to actually be straight. And how he makes that claim is with a really great example. He asks Graham, he's like, how did you get into real estate? How did you get converted into real estate? And Graham goes, I didn't get converted into real estate. I figured it out myself. It's like, really, Graham? That's not what happened, dude. Like, how did you find out about it? And that's what Patrick Bet-David asked him. He's like, well, how did you even know real estate exists? And then Graham is like, well, there was an ad I saw on TV and it was talking about real estate. That's how I got into it. And Patrick is like, aha, that's how you got into real estate, which is being influenced. And basically Patrick's point is like, now, if you had an ad that was talking about how amazing it is to be gay or transgender or bisexual, and even if you weren't planning on doing that, you might just sign up. You might be like, fucking, that's cool. Like, because it's happening so often and we're talking about it so often, let's just do it. And society is shaped, our culture is shaped by these ads and what's popularized, right? For example, if you go back a couple of years in 1990s, 1980s, what type of women were attractive? They were slim and they were skinny and they had this certain feminine look about them that everybody found attractive. But then in our generation, the generation I was born, what is attractive? You have to have a fat ass and big tits and you got to look like a fucking S. And it's crazy, right? And how did that get popularized? Through music and through fashion and through Instagram and social media. And so we were marketed this and now we find those things attractive, right? I grew up to find that attractive. And I thought I just naturally found that attractive, but I was probably heavily influenced by social media, by TV, by the rap songs, and by what everybody said beauty looked like. And so I developed that vision of that's what beauty is. So we want to be careful in terms of how we go and educate the world and what things we want to promote and market. So I think we should teach people to be loving and inclusive of every single person. But I personally just don't think that children need to be learning about sexuality. I think children need to be learning about how does money work so I don't get in debt and be depressed? How does fitness work so I don't get fat and get fucking 25 diseases later on in my life? And they need to learn how to communicate so they don't lead to 50% divorce. Primarily happens because of lack of communication skills. People can't resolve conflict, handle stress, handle finances. And so it's like if you're taught money, fitness, and communication, you will go on to be a great human being and you will give birth to new great human beings. That's the way that I think. And I agree with Patrick Bet-David. I don't so much agree in terms of like we need to start teaching about God in the school. I think like, again, if you believe in God and you want to instill your religion and values into your child, I think that's great. But if I had a kid and they're going to school and they're being taught God, and maybe I don't want them to learn about that, I'd rather they learn about fucking math, or I'd rather they learn about logic or something else. Like I'd rather they get more jacked in the meantime. That's what should happen, right? I don't think we should like replace one thing with the other thing. I think we should just keep schools out of sexuality and religion. Focus on learning and educating, because I think that's their purpose. If you want your kid to be educated on God, send them to church, send them to a mosque, send them to a synagogue or a temple, send them to a religious institution whose job is to teach you about religion. Send them there. Those exist. But a public school's job, in my opinion, is teach the fucking kids the valuable skills that make sure they don't get divorced, valuable skills that make sure they don't kill themselves when they grow older, make sure they don't get diseases. The opposite of that should be taught, which is, hey, how do you get jacked and get fit? How do you go have a relationship and keep the relationship? How do you handle conflict and do conflict resolution and have great communication? And how do you make money? All of the most valuable skills that lead to a mentally healthy human being that's emotionally healthy, physically healthy, and financially healthy. Those are the things, in my opinion, that should be taught. And I think the conversation that Patrick Bet-David had with Graham was incredible and eye-opening. And I think like Graham should have taken a side and stood his ground on something. I find it weird when people don't have any opinion, because then it's like, you know, I would say pick something or explain a clear side. I was more on Patrick Bet-David's side with the examples that he gave. I thought those were brilliant. So that's my opinion. Hope you enjoyed this video. Peace.